that white building over there, the Reichskommissar, this man of Reichskommissariat Ostland, was located. And this Nazi administrator administrated Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania and a part of Belarus that were occupied by the forces of the Third Reich. What were Hitler's plans with this area? That and more you will learn today. Hitler controlled not just the timing of Germany's aggression in World War II, but also the ideological goals behind it. His long-term vision was a racially reorganized Europe dominated by what he considered a pure German people. Central to this plan was Lebensraum, expanding eastward into Soviet territory to cede land, food, and resources. Hitler believed this land should be taken by destroying, enslaving, or deporting local populations, especially Slavs and Jews. Although Nazi propaganda claimed the invasion of the Soviet Union was about defeating Bolshevism, Hitler's real aim was a war of annihilation. The campaign was designed not just to defeat armies, but to starve civilians, exploit resources, and carry out mass murder, especially of Jews. Within the Nazi leadership, different officials proposed competing visions for how to rule the conquered East. Alfred Rosenberg suggested using some non-Russian national groups as partners under German control. Heinrich Himmler and the SS pushed a harsher approach: mass deportations, extermination, and German colonization under the so-called Generalplan Ost. Hitler largely favored Himmler's more extreme model. For the Baltic States, Nazi plans generally aimed at annexation and Germanization, definitely not Baltic independence. Nazi racial theorists debated how valuable Estonians, Latvians, and Lithuanians were, and how many could be assimilated versus deported. These judgments shifted over time and were influenced by Germany's military situation. In reality, no single master plan for the East was ever fully implemented. Rival Nazi agencies fought over authority, policies were inconsistent, and decisions often depended on how individuals interpreted Hitler's wishes. As Germany's war situation worsened after 1942-43, ideological colonization plans gave way to military necessity, though core goals like the extermination of Jews never changed. At dawn on the 22nd of June 1941, Nazi Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest invasion in history. For the Baltic States, it meant that one brutal occupation, Soviet rule, was about to be replaced by another, Nazi rule. German Army Group North smashed into Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia with speed and shock. Soviet bases, think of airfields, ports, and railway stations, were bombed in the opening hours. Red Army units were caught completely off guard and collapsed almost immediately. Command structures broke down and entire formations fled east in chaos. In Lithuania, the local resistance rose up to fight the retreating Soviets. They managed to seize control in Kaunas and Vilnius, among others, before the Wehrmacht arrived. A few cities saw serious fighting between German and Soviet forces. In Liepāja, trapped Soviet troops fought desperately to escape and circumvent, rather than defend the city itself. Elsewhere, German forces advanced swiftly. Vilnius fell within days, Riga was entered on the 1st of July, and Tallinn was isolated later. To many locals, the Germans initially appeared as liberators. Just weeks earlier, the Soviets had deported tens of thousands of people. The Reichskommissariat Ostland was the name given to the civil administration of part of the eastern territories of the Third Reich. The name Ostland was used to refer to the Baltic States occupied by Germany, as well as western Belarus. This area was administered as a colony of Nazi Germany by a Führer decree of July 17, 1941. Ostland became one of the Reichskommissariats, Reichskommissariate, areas of the Greater German Reich that were administered by civil authorities. They fell under the authority of Reichsleiter Alfred Rosenberg. He was Reich Minister for the occupied Eastern Territories. All kinds of details of the administration of the Reichskommissariats were described in the same decree. An instruction for the administrators of the territories was drawn up by Rosenberg himself. The highest authority of the Reichskommissariat Ostland was Reichskommissar für das Ostland Hinrich Lohse. The area was subdivided into 4 Generalbezirke: Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and White Ruthenia, part of Belarus. Each Generalbezirk was further subdivided into Kreisgebiete. The capital of Ostland was Riga. Estonia was governed by Generalkommissar Karl Sigmund Litzmann, with Tallinn as its capital, where Litzmann also had his seat. This Generalbezirk was in fact independent since Estonia had switched from military administration by the Wehrmacht to civil administration. Then there was Generalbezirk Lettland, Latvia, and this area was administered by Generalkommissar Otto Heinrich Drechsler, with Riga as its capital. Lithuania was administered by Generalkommissar Theodor Adrian von Renteln, with Kaunas as its capital. Generalbezirk Weißruthenia, or White Ruthenia, was administered by Wilhelm Kube until 1943 and Kurt von Gottberg after that year, with Minsk as its capital. The Wehrmacht and the SS controlled the military and security apparatus. Fritz Sauckel, Reich Minister for Labor, controlled the workers and labor camps. Hermann Göring and Albert Speer managed economic affairs. In July 1941, a civil administration was announced for the occupied territories in the Soviet Union, but it had not yet been actually established. A power vacuum arose, which was filled by the SS and all cooperating organizations. In this way, they gained unlimited, but above all, absolute power in these areas. They relinquished this power with great reluctance in September 1941, when the civil administration came into force. Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS, tried unsuccessfully until the end of 1943 to regain this power. This partially explains the difficult relationship between the SS and the administrative apparatus. In Ostland, issues and other matters were made rather complicated by the Höhere SS- und Polizeiführer Friedrich Jeckeln, who was fiercely criticized by his opponents in both the SS and the administration for his corruption, brutality, and reckless behavior. Jeckeln commanded the Einsatzgruppe death squads and was personally responsible for ordering and organizing the death of over 100,000 Jews, Romani, and other so-called undesirables. He was hanged after the war. During the occupation, a German-language newspaper, Die Deutsche Zeitung im Ostland, was also published. Immediately after Hinrich Lohse was appointed Reichskommissar, he announced the confiscation of all state property of the Soviet Union in Belarus and the Baltic States, and transferring it to German administration. In Ostland, land confiscated by the Soviets was returned to its former owners, the farmers. In villages and towns, shops, businesses, and industries were returned to their former owners. But they had to pay high taxes to the occupying forces. In return, Jewish property was permanently confiscated. Belarus was an exception, though. A state-owned company was established to manage all former state property of the Soviet Union. State monopolies and private industrial companies affiliated with the German government were quickly established to manage the confiscated companies. The Hermann Göring Werke, Mannesmann, IG Farben, and Siemens took over the management of all former state-owned companies of the Soviet Union in the Reichskommissariat Ostland and Ukraine. In Belarus, the German authorities regretted that what they called the Soviet Bolshevik government had thought nothing about the basic ideas and concepts of private property, ownership, or personal initiative. This was in contrast to the Baltic States, where the Germans reported that during the war and the early stages of occupation, the population showed that it genuinely wanted to cooperate and that it might then be able to obtain an autonomous government. This, of course, never happened. In these areas, nationalist sentiments among the Baltic people were more rife. According to Sven von Krosigk, Reich Minister of Finance, the German government received a total of more than 753.6 million Reichsmark in occupation costs and taxes until February 1944. The Reich Ministry of the Occupied Eastern Territories asked Lohse and the Reichscommissioner for Ukraine, Erich Koch, to supply Germany with workers. They needed a total of 360,000 agricultural workers and 247,000 industrial workers. The Germans regarded peoples such as Russians, Belarusians, and Ukrainians as slave laborers who could be worked to death. The political goals described by Alfred Rosenberg were to expel the Eastern European peoples and eliminated the so-called Great Russian Threat. The long-term plans for Ostland differed from those of the Reichskommissariats of Ukraine and the proposed ones in the Caucasus and Moscow. The Baltic countries were to be transformed into a Germanized protectorate, which would come after an alliance with Germany. Rosenberg said that these countries had a European character, which was the result of 700 years of history. These countries would provide Lebensraum. All this could be achieved through the racial assimilation of the Baltic and some Belarusian peoples into a uniform Germanic population. The regime planned to encourage Germans to settle in Ostland after the war, as it was seen as an area traditionally inhabited by Germanic people. In the province of Pskov in Russia, ethnic Germans from Romania, together with Dutch people, were resettled. The settlement of Dutch colonists was managed by the Dutch East Company, a Dutch-German organization, perhaps something for a future episode, so subscribe if you haven't already. Conquered territories further in the east were under military administration throughout the war. At the time of the German invasion in June 1941, there were significant Jewish minorities in Ostland, numbering almost 480,000 people. This number was increased by Jews deported from Germany, Austria, and the occupied territories. The Jews were confined to the ghettos of Riga, Kaunas, Liepāja, and Dvinsk, which soon became overcrowded. From there, they were taken to execution sites. The Red Army discovered extermination centers near Kaunas and Vilnius, which were part of the final solution. The murder of prominent Jews began almost immediately after the invasion and was later expanded. By the fall of 1943, the ghettos had been liquidated, and the remaining inhabitants were moved to the camps. If they were not considered fit for work or survived the journey, they were killed immediately. Both German and local police organizations were constantly busy dealing with partisans in Belarus. They noticed that the so-called infected zones where partisans were active covered an area of 500 to 600 square kilometers around Minsk, Pinsk, Gomel, Smolensk, and Vitebsk, including the important railroads. Reichskommissariat Ostland ended because Nazi Germany began losing the war against the Soviet Union. From 1943 onward, the Red Army pushed west after major victories like Stalingrad, Kursk, and especially during Operation Bagration. German forces in the Baltic region were slowly forced to retreat. Soviet troops retook Belarus in 1944 and most of the Baltic region the same year. As the front collapsed, the German civilian administration of Ostland stopped functioning. Nazi officials fled, were evacuated, or came under military control. By late 1944, almost all of Ostland had been reconquered by the Soviets. The last German holdout was Courland in western Latvia, where a large German force was surrounded. This Courland pocket remained under German control until May 1945. When Germany surrendered. With the German defeat, Reichskommissariat Ostland was dissolved. The Baltic States were reoccupied by the Soviet Union. Ostland had existed as a colonial Nazi regime built on exploitation and terror. It disappeared the moment German military power collapsed. Despite its brutal rule, there were many Eastern Europeans who collaborated with the Nazis for all sorts of different reasons: ideology, loathing of Soviet rule, pragmatism, or coercion. Click here for more on this.